They had their hands on my collar before I could say a single word. 2 officers, one with a buzz cut, one with a thick red neck and a face like old brick, grabbed me by the arms and hauled me across the marble floor of the Hargrove County Courthouse like I was a problem they needed to get rid of. My briefcase hit the floor. Papers scattered. People in the lobby froze mid-step, staring. Someone pulled out their phone. I remember thinking, good, keep recording, because what was happening right now was going to matter, in ways none of these people could begin to imagine. But let me take you back to the morning that changed everything, and back further still, to the life I had built long before any of this. I grew up in Eastfield, the kind of neighborhood where you learn 2 things early: how to carry yourself with dignity, and how to survive people who didn't want you to. My father worked nights at the water treatment plant and came home smelling of chlorine and exhaustion, setting his thermos on the kitchen counter before he'd even taken off his coat. My mother taught 4th grade and stayed up late correcting papers with a red pen that scratched loud in the quiet of the house. They raised me to be precise, careful, to document everything. The world will ask you to prove yourself twice, my father used to say, not looking up from the newspaper. Be ready to prove it 3 times. I filed that away the way I filed everything, quietly, permanently, in a place where it wouldn't get lost. I spent 11 years with the Department of Justice, working investigations that didn't make the news because the people involved made sure they didn't. Corruption cases, misconduct patterns buried under paperwork and silence, and the quiet, practiced loyalty of institutions protecting themselves. I learned how a department could look clean on the surface while something rotten moved beneath it, slow and patient as groundwater. I got good at finding the cracks, at following the water. And when the position opened at Hargrove County, head of internal affairs, a department that had seen 3 directors resign in 4 years under circumstances that were, to put it generously, murky, I applied. I got the call on a Tuesday afternoon, standing in my kitchen in a city 300 miles away, and I held the phone for a long moment after they told me before I said yes. I hadn't told anyone yet, not my sister, not my former supervisor, not even my old partner Calvin, who I'd worked with for 6 years and trusted more than almost anyone on earth. The appointment was being announced officially at a press conference the following afternoon. I had one morning to get my bearings first, visit the courthouse, collect some personnel files from the clerk's office, and walk the building that was about to become my territory. I dressed carefully that morning, dark slacks, a charcoal blazer, a tie my mother had given me for my law school graduation, deep burgundy with a thin gold stripe that she'd picked out herself, holding it up in the store light to check the sheen. I looked at myself in the mirror of the hotel bathroom. I was staying at the Hargrove Marriott until I found an apartment, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not excitement, exactly. Readiness, the quiet, focused kind that doesn't shake. I picked up my briefcase, slipped in the folder with my appointment letter, the department overview the outgoing director had couriered over the previous week, and 3 sealed evidence packets that had come with a handwritten note that simply said, "You'll understand why I left." I tucked them carefully. I picked up my room key. I walked out into the pale morning. The courthouse sat at the center of downtown Hargrove like it had always been there and always intended to stay. Cream-colored stone, broad front steps, tall windows that caught the early light and gave it back cold. I came in through the main entrance at 8:47 in the morning. I knew the time because I checked my watch on the steps, a habit from the academy, log everything, time everything. The lobby was already moving, clerks carrying folders, an attorney speaking quietly into his phone near the water fountain, a security guard scrolling behind his desk with the detached patience of someone who had seen every kind of morning. I walked toward the staircase on the far side and had made it halfway across the upper landing when I heard boots on marble behind me. Fast. Hey, hey, stop right there. I turned slowly. 2 officers. The one in front was younger, buzz-cut, pale and flushed with something that wasn't quite exertion, his hand already moving toward his belt. The one behind him was broader, older, a jaw like a shelf, calm the way people are calm when they're certain of their own authority. His name tag read, Briggs. "Can I help you?" I said. "What you doing in this building?" Not a question. A sentence with a wall at the end of it. I breathed through the familiar weight that settled over me. The weight I'd first felt at 17 when a patrol car had followed me for 6 blocks on the way home from debate practice, and I'd had to decide how to hold my body, my face, my hands. "I have business in the clerk's office," I said evenly. "I'm collecting personnel files." "Personnel files?" Briggs repeated it the way people repeat something back to you when they want you to hear how ridiculous it sounds. He exchanged a look with the younger officer. "You got ID? Authorization?" "I have both," I said, and reached for my briefcase. "Keep your hands where I can see them." The younger officer's voice jumped up half an octave. His hand closed around his belt. I stopped. I stood very still. Around us on the landing, people had started to pause. A woman at a bench near the wall, a court clerk half emerged from a doorway, a young man in a suit holding a stack of folders who was staring with the expression of someone calculating whether to step in. I looked directly at Briggs. "Officer," I said, "I am going to reach into my briefcase and show you my appointment letter and my federal identification. I am going to do that slowly and clearly. Is that understood?" Briggs stepped closer. He was near enough that I could smell the coffee on his breath and something underneath it. Something older and more set. The smell of a man who had been doing things his way for a long time without consequence. "What I understand," he said quietly, "is that you've been walking this floor for 20 minutes and nobody here knows who you are." "Then let me show you exactly who I am," I said. He didn't let me. He nodded once to his partner, and they took my arms, one on each side, and they walked me down the staircase. I didn't fight it. I didn't pull back. I walked because I had learned a long time ago that what you do in the moment of the injustice matters less than what you do in the hours that follow. My briefcase hit the marble when someone's knee caught it. Papers skidded across the floor. The woman near the bench said something sharp. The young man with the folders dropped to one knee and picked up a document. My appointment letter, the official one with the county seal and the director's signature. And he stood holding it, reading it, and the color shifted in his face, the way color shifts when something genuinely unexpected arrives. But they already had me through the front doors and out into the cold morning, and the heavy glass swung shut behind me, and I stood on the courthouse steps with the briefcase at my feet and my papers spilled across the stone. I stood there for a moment. The street was ordinary. Traffic. A dog walker. A woman in a yellow coat waiting for a bus. The sun was the kind of cold, clear white that gives everything sharp edges but no warmth. My hands were steady. I picked up the briefcase. I gathered the papers from the steps, smoothing each one against my thigh. I checked my watch. 9:14. The press conference was at 2 o'clock. I had 4 hours and 46 minutes. I pulled out my phone and called Calvin. He answered on the second ring, the way he always did, like he'd been half expecting it. "Marcus, what's up?" "I need you to make 3 calls," I said. My voice level, almost conversational. One to the U.S. Attorney's Regional Office, one to the County Oversight Board Chair, and one to the DOJ Community Affairs Director. I tucked the last paper back into the briefcase and clicked it shut. "Tell them to clear their afternoons." A pause. I could hear him reading the situation the way Calvin always read silences, carefully, without filling them. "How bad?" he said. "Not bad for us," I said. "But Calvin, I want everything documented before noon. Every name, every badge number. I want the courthouse security footage requested through proper channels, formally, with a timestamp on the request. And if anyone captured video on a phone in that lobby, I want it preserved. A longer pause this time. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped slightly, the way it did when he was being precise. "Are you all right?" I looked back at the courthouse doors. Through the glass I could see Briggs talking to a colleague at the security desk, unhurried, already past it, the particular ease of a man who has never had reason to believe a morning like this one would find him again. I thought about my father, the thermos on the counter. Prove it 3 times. I thought about the sealed evidence packets sitting in my briefcase, the ones the outgoing director had left with a note I now understood differently than I had an hour ago. "I'm better than all right," I said. "I'll see you at 2. I hung up. I walked back toward the hotel through the cold, bright morning, and I did not hurry, and I did not look back. And somewhere behind me in the clerk's office on the 2nd floor of the Hargrove County Courthouse, a young man in a suit was still holding my appointment letter, reading it a second time, and beginning to understand exactly what the next few hours were going to look like. Calvin met me in the hotel lobby at 10:30, with a coffee he'd gotten from the place across the street, and a look on his face that I'd seen before. Twice specifically, both times right before something significant broke open. He handed me the cup and sat down across from me in one of the low armchairs near the window without saying anything for a moment. Outside, Hargrove went about its morning. A delivery truck idled. A woman pushed a stroller through a patch of pale sunlight. "The footage request went through at 9:58, he said finally. "Logged, time-stamped, confirmation receipt attached, and there were 4 people in that lobby with phones out. I've already made contact with 2 of them." He slid a folded paper across the table. "One of them is a paralegal. She got the whole thing from the staircase. 43 seconds of clear footage. I picked up the paper and looked at it. Her name, her contact information, a brief description of what she'd captured. My eyes moved over the words carefully, and then I set it down and lifted the coffee. It was too hot, but I drank it anyway, tasting nothing. "The U.S. Attorney's Office," I said. "They're clearing the afternoon," Calvin said. He hesitated, a thing Calvin almost never did, and then he continued. "Marcus, I also ran the names. Briggs and his partner, officer named Delano. Both are in the Internal Affairs intake files, the ones the outgoing director flagged." He glanced at my briefcase. "I'm guessing you already knew that." I hadn't. Not specifically. I had known the sealed packets contained personnel complaints. I had assumed 3, maybe 4 officers named in a pattern of misconduct. I opened the briefcase now, right there in the hotel lobby, and I laid the 3 sealed envelopes on the table between us, and I opened the first one. Briggs's name appeared on the 2nd page, then the 4th. Then in a summary note at the bottom signed by a complaints review officer who had been reassigned abruptly 18 months ago. 7 formal complaints in 4 years. Excessive force. Unlawful detention. 1 racial discrimination finding that had been administratively downgraded to a procedural note and buried in a supplemental file that was cross-referenced in a way that made it nearly unfindable. My throat tightened, not with shock. I had seen versions of this before, in other counties, in other departments, the same architecture of protection repeating itself like a bad blueprint, but with something sharper. Recognition. The knowledge that the morning's events had not been random. Briggs had known about the internal affairs position. Someone had told him. And when he had seen a black man in a good suit carrying a briefcase on the upper landing of his courthouse, he had made a decision. I sat with that for a long moment. Calvin watched me and said nothing. The 2nd envelope contained a ledger. Printed, not original, but authenticated by the outgoing director's signature, showing discretionary fund allocations over a 3-year period. Specific line items that shouldn't have been line items. payments classified as community liaison services that corresponded in date and amount to an outside consulting firm, that when I checked the registration number printed in the margin in the outgoing director's careful handwriting, was registered to the wife of Deputy Chief Raymond Colt. The same Raymond Colt whose office was on the 3rd floor of the Hargrove County Courthouse. The same Raymond Colt who had, I would later learn, personally approved Briggs's reinstatement after his 3rd complaint was downgraded. I closed the envelope. Outside the window the delivery truck had moved on. The woman with the stroller was gone. "Calvin," I said quietly, "I need a notary and a scanner and a secure upload link to the DOJ document repository. In that order, in the next 2 hours." Calvin was already reaching for his phone. The notary was a woman named Mrs. Aldridge, who operated out of a small office above a dry cleaner 3 blocks from the hotel. She was 60-something, deliberate, with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and a stamp she brought down with the finality of someone who understood that some documents matter more than others. She witnessed my signatures on the certification forms without asking questions, which I appreciated. The scanner in her office was slow. I stood and watched each page feed through and come up clean on her screen, and I thought about the outgoing director, a man I had never met, whose name was Gerald Okafor, who had left behind 3 sealed envelopes and a handwritten note, and then quietly disappeared to a federal position in another state. I thought about what it had cost him to compile this, to carry it for however long he had carried it before deciding to pass it forward. I owed him a debt I could not repay directly. I uploaded the final file at 12:41 and got the confirmation ping on my phone at 12:43. I thanked Mrs. Aldridge. I walked back through the cold air to the hotel. I stood in the bathroom for a few minutes and looked at my own face in the mirror, not checking anything, just looking. And then I straightened my tie. The burgundy one. The gold stripe caught the light. At 1:15 I walked into the county building for the 2nd time that day. This time I came through the side entrance where a clerk named Patterson was expecting me. Patterson was 26, junior staff, and he had been the young man in the lobby that morning, the one who had held my appointment letter and read it twice and understood. He met me at the door with an expression that landed somewhere between guilt and determination. He handed me back my appointment letter without a word. I nodded once and he held the door, and I walked inside. The press conference was in the 3rd floor conference room. When I came through the door at 1:58, the room was already arranged. Local press, 3 camera crews, a row of county officials along one wall, and at the front, behind a podium bearing the county seal, County Executive Patricia Meade, who had made the appointment and who I was meeting in person for the first time. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and the practiced stillness of someone who had been in rooms like this for a long time. She looked at me and then at the briefcase, and something in her expression shifted. Not surprise. Calculation. "Director Wells," she said, extending her hand. "I'm glad you're here." "So am I said, and I shook her hand, and behind me the door opened again, and Calvin walked in, and behind Calvin walked a woman I recognized from her file photograph. Regional Director Sandra Choi from the U.S. Attorney's Office, holding a leather portfolio and wearing the expression of someone who has already read everything she needs to read. I watched Deputy Chief Raymond Colt register her presence from across the room. I watched the color shift in his face. He knew Sandra Choi. More importantly, Sandra Choi knew him. Patricia Meade began the press conference at 2 o'clock exactly. She introduced me. There was polite applause. I stepped to the podium and looked out at the cameras and the faces, and I felt not triumph, nothing as unsteady as triumph. That quiet, dangerous clarity I'd felt on the courthouse steps. Everything ready. Everything in place. "Before I make my opening remarks," I said, "I want to acknowledge something that occurred this morning in this building." I kept my voice even, my hands still on the sides of the podium. At approximately 9:14 a.m., I was physically removed from the premises of this courthouse by 2 officers, without cause, without identification request fulfilled, and without due process. I am a duly appointed county official. I had my appointment letter in my briefcase. The removal was captured on security footage and on private cell phone video by multiple witnesses. I paused. Not for effect. I had never cared about effect for its own sake. But to let the room catch up. I heard a camera click, heard someone shift in their seat, heard from the far wall a short, sharp exhale. The names of the officers involved have been provided to the U.S. Attorney's Regional Office, along with documentation relevant to their disciplinary histories, which I received as part of my onboarding materials. I looked up and found Sandra Choi's face in the back of the room. She gave me a small, precise nod. Additionally, documentation has been provided relating to financial irregularities in departmental discretionary fund allocations over the past 3 fiscal years. These matters are now under federal review. The room had gone very still. I looked at Colt. He was standing with one hand on the back of a chair, gripping it, the knuckles pale. His face was careful in the way faces are careful when a person is deciding very quickly whether flight or stillness is the better strategy. I want to be clear, I continued, that this department, Internal Affairs, the office I now lead, exists because accountability is not optional. It is not an inconvenience. It is not something we get to schedule around the comfort of those in power. My voice was level. Room temperature. The kind of level that is far more dangerous than shouting. This morning reminded me of why this work matters. It also introduced me to the full scope of what needs to change here. I looked back at the cameras. My door is open, my records are clean, and I intend to keep it that way. I stepped back from the podium. The room held its silence for exactly 1 beat before it broke open. The weeks that followed moved the way serious things move. Not fast and dramatic, but steady. Each piece falling where it was supposed to fall with the patient logic of a well-built case. Briggs was suspended pending investigation within 48 hours of the press conference, the footage and Choi's office working in parallel. Delano was placed on administrative leave. Raymond Colt resigned 11 days later, releasing a 3-paragraph statement that acknowledged compliance concerns in language so vague and so carefully lawyered that it said nothing, and everyone understood everything. The consulting firm was dissolved. The money, most of it, was recovered. Colt, I was told by Choi in a phone call the following month, was looking at federal charges. He had retained counsel. He was no longer in possession of the calm that had defined him for 30 years. I found out later that it had been Colt who had told Briggs about the internal affairs appointment, that he had described the incoming director as an outsider with an agenda, that Briggs had decided, on his own initiative and with the assurance of years of impunity behind him, to make a problem disappear before it became one. He had not known that the outsider had walked in carrying the very files that named him. He had not known that Gerald Okafor, 3 states away, had spent 18 months building a record precisely so that whoever came next would be armed before they ever set foot in the building. He had not known any of that. Now he did. I moved into the apartment I'd rented in the Mallory district in early spring. 3rd floor, 2 windows facing east, a kitchen that smelled like old paint and coffee grounds, and the particular neutrality of a space that hasn't been lived in for a while. I liked it. It felt like a room where nothing had been decided yet. I put my father's thermos on the counter. I had asked my mother to send it, the battered silver one with the dent near the base that he'd carried every night for 22 years. And I looked at it there against the white tile, and I thought about him standing in his own kitchen every morning, setting it down, the weight of it, the ordinary faithfulness of it. Calvin came by the first Saturday with 2 coffees and a box of pastries from the place down the block. We sat at the small table by the east window in the pale morning light, and didn't say much, which was the right thing. Below us on the street a man was walking a large brown dog, and the dog stopped every few feet to investigate something invisible, and the man waited patiently each time, with his hands in his pockets. "You hear Briggs is fighting the suspension," Calvin said, not particularly invested in the answer. "Let him fight it," I said. Calvin looked at me. "You're not worried." "No," I said, and I meant it in the complete way, not the performing confidence way. The evidence was what it was. The footage was what it was. The files Okafor had left me were what they were. Some things are simply settled. I lifted my coffee. Through the window the morning was doing what mornings do, coming in sideways through the glass, touching everything lightly, making the ordinary world look almost precious. I thought about the courthouse steps, the cold, bright air, the sound of my briefcase hitting marble. I thought about standing at the podium with the whole room gone silent. I thought about my father's voice, low and patient. "Prove it 3 times." I had. I drank my coffee. For the first time in longer than I could precisely remember, it tasted like nothing but coffee, warm and clean, and exactly what it was supposed to be. My thermos caught the light on the counter, the dent near the base glinting like a small, quiet medal.